Imagine a city where there is no money. Not because everyone has become good, but because it's easier to control people that way. Here, you don't buy anything. You just get as much as you are allowed to want. One day, an ordinary worker in the system receives less food than yesterday. No explanation, no mistake. Simply because the algorithm decided his need has decreased. He does not yet know that in this city, the real currency is not resources, not things, and not even labor. The real currency is silence. And as soon as you stop being silent, the city begins to break down. This is a story about a world without money, and about the price we pay when we let someone else decide what we have the right to want. Chapter 1. The City Where Nothing is Bought. There were no price tags in this city, not in shop windows, not in people's eyes. Evan Cole realized this too late to be surprised. He was born here, grew up here, and learned to live as if the absence of money was not a peculiarity, but a law of nature. Like gravity. Like a shadow that always falls in one direction. He walked down a street paved with smooth gray slabs that never cracked. Not because they were perfect, but because they were monitored. There were no cameras hanging over the city, at least no one saw them. But everyone knew. The system sees. The buildings stood in uniform rows, without balconies, without unnecessary details. Architecture without character. There was nothing here that could cause envy. And envy, as everyone knew, upset the balance. Evan stopped at the food distribution point. The line was long but silent. People stood exactly half a meter apart. That was more convenient for the system. Some held tokens in their hands, others just stared at the floor. Talking was not prohibited, but it was not encouraged. And over time, anything that is not encouraged disappears on its own. Evan looked at the screen above the entrance. Today's needs have been determined. Thank you for your cooperation. He sighed, not out of fatigue, but out of habit. Thank you for your cooperation. A phrase that sounded polite, but was actually an order. When the line moved, he felt a slight tension. This always happened, even though he knew he would get exactly what he got yesterday. That's how stability worked. It didn't bring joy, but it didn't leave hope either. A woman in her 50s stood in front of him. She held her token with 2 fingers, as if afraid to drop it. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, but not from age, from a constant inner readiness to agree. When it was her turn, the woman took a step forward. The glass between her and the clerk was transparent but cold, like water in a pool you don't want to get into. Your name, said the clerk without looking up. Martha Rain, the woman replied quietly. Fingers tapped quickly on the keyboard. Today's standard set, said the employee. Bread, soup, water. Martha nodded. She didn't even say thank you. Gratitude was considered an excessive emotion in this city. When she walked away, Evan took her place. Name, the employee repeated. Evan Cole. The typing stopped. For a second. It was almost imperceptible, but Evan noticed it. He had worked in the system too long not to notice such pauses. Today, the woman hesitated for a moment. Today you are entitled to half a portion. Evan blinked. Excuse me? She finally looked up. Her gaze was empty, neither cruel nor sympathetic. Just absent. Your requirement has been revised. But I didn't request a review. The review may have been initiated by the system. For what reason? The woman's fingers hovered over the keyboard. The reason is not displayed. Evan felt a strange warmth in his chest. Not anger, not yet. more like surprise, which was beginning to turn into something more dangerous. "I eat the same amount as yesterday," he said. "I work the same amount. My activity level." "Your personal feelings are not a criterion," she interrupted. "Only the balance is taken into account." She pressed a button. The bread tray rolled back. Evan stood motionless. Someone behind him coughed impatiently, but quietly. The queue did not like delays. "This is a mistake," he said more quietly. "Mistakes are not recorded," replied the woman, already looking past him. "Next." Evan stepped aside, empty-handed. The street was bright, too bright to feel comfortable. The sun reflected off the gray surfaces, and the city seemed sterile, as if it had just been disinfected of human emotions. He walked slowly, trying to understand what he was feeling. Hunger? No. Half a portion would be enough to survive. He knew that. He himself had signed such decisions. The word floated into his head like something forbidden. He hadn't been taught that word as a child. Not because it was forbidden, but because it was unnecessary. Evan had been working in the needs assessment department for 9 years. He knew how balance was formed, how numbers became decisions, how life was compressed into tables. He knew that sometimes people get less, and he knew that sometimes it was fair. But for the first time, the system had affected him. It was quiet in the stairwell of his building. Neighbors didn't greet each other, not out of hostility, but to save energy. Everyone lived in their own corridor of permission. Evan entered his apartment. It was the same as yesterday, the same as the day before yesterday, the same as a year ago. A table, a bed, a screen on the wall. He sat down and looked at the empty surface of the table. Usually, there was a plate there at this time. Today, nothing. The screen turned on by itself. System message. Changes to your needs are optimal. Please do not submit repeated requests. Evan smiled, barely noticeably. For the first time in a long time, he suddenly understood a simple thing. If nothing is bought in this city, then everything has a price. It's just that they don't say what it is. And today, for the first time, the system set a price for him. Chapter 2. Needs Assessment Department. The Needs Assessment Department was located in a building without a sign. It didn't need a name. Everyone knew what went on inside. Those who didn't know never went there. Evan arrived earlier than usual. Not because he had more work to do, but because he didn't want to be alone with an empty desk and thoughts that were beginning to run wild. The hall was bright and quiet. White light without shadows, the system standard. There were to be no corners where thoughts could hide. "Morning," said the guard. "Morning," Evan replied. They exchanged a nod. No questions, no emotions. The guard checked his ID, and the door opened by itself. The department consisted of long rows of workstations separated by low partitions. Not for privacy, for concentration. Each employee had a screen, headphones, and a keyboard, and a set of rules that was updated daily. Evan sat down at his desk. The screen lit up. "Good morning, Evan Cool. Ready for distribution?" He paused for a moment on the word ready. Formally, it was a question. In essence, it was a reminder that there was always only one answer. "Yes," he said aloud. The headphones pressed softly against his ears. The world outside the department disappeared. Only the data remained. First profile. Name: Harold Mills. Age: 67. Status: retired. Request: extra heat at night. Evan reviewed the metrics. Energy consumption: above average. Physical activity: low. The system highlighted the recommendation. Reject. Reason: balance. Evan paused the cursor. Harold Mills. He had seen that name before. An old man who lived on the top floor of a building without an elevator. A former engineer. He used to build something for the city. Evan couldn't remember what. Details like that faded over time. It makes sense, Evan whispered, as if justifying himself. He doesn't need more heat than the system allows. He pressed reject. Second profile. Name: Laura King. Age: 29. Status: active. Request: extra portion of food. The indicators were normal, even slightly higher than average. Recommendation: reject. Evan did it almost automatically. Third, fourth, fifth. The requests came one after another. People weren't asking for luxuries, just small things. A little warmer, a little more light, a little less silence. And the system responded in the same way. Balance. An hour later, Evan caught himself feeling strange. Each reject resonated differently than it had yesterday. Not like a number. Like someone's hand that he was pushing away. The next profile made him sit up straight. Name: Thomas Rain. Age: 74. Status: limited activity. Request: permission for individual lighting in the evening. The surname was familiar. Rain. Evan remembered the woman from the queue. Martha Rain. A coincidence? The system did not believe in coincidences. He opened the additional information. Reason for request: decreased vision. Medical confirmation: available. System recommendation: reject. Evan slowly took off his headphones. The world returned. A cough somewhere in the distance. The quiet tapping of keys. Someone took a sip of water. "You're frozen," said his colleague on the left. Her name was Nora. He knew that, but he never asked anything else. "Checking the data," he replied. "Don't bother. If the system gave a recommendation, it's already done all the calculations." "What if it hasn't?" Nora looked at him. Something like fear flashed in her eyes. "Are you feeling unwell?" "No." "Then don't complicate things." She turned back to her screen. The conversation was over. Evan looked at Thomas Rain's profile again. Light. The man had simply asked for light. He imagined the old man in a dimly lit room. Not as a picture, as a fact. A fact that didn't fit into the table. His finger hovered over the button. Reject. Approve. The second button was gray. It was rarely pressed. Very rarely. Evan pressed it. An input field appeared on the screen. Reasoning. He stared at the empty line. No words came. Because everything he could write had no numbers. He closed the field. The system instantly returned the recommendation to the default. Reject. Evan clicked. At that moment, something inside him broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, like a hair snapping inside glass. A few minutes later, the screen went dark. Break. Evan didn't go to the break room. He went into the hallway where no one usually went. There was a wall without screens, just a wall. He leaned his back against it. For the first time in 9 years, he asked himself a question that had never even occurred to him before. What if balance isn't about fairness? What if it's just a convenient form of control? He knew that such thoughts were not punishable. They were simply corrected. And suddenly he realized one more thing, cold and precise. The system was not wrong when it reduced his portion. It had noticed. Chapter 3. Forbidden Desire. Evan never made personal requests. Not because he didn't want to, but because he had learned not to formulate desires. In a city where everything was predetermined, desires were considered an unnecessary step between a person and balance. And unnecessary steps attracted attention. He walked home, even though he could have used public transportation. The system allowed it. But today he needed to feel the distance. Every meter, every movement. The city lived evenly, without haste. People walked their routes like notes in a score where improvisation was not allowed. Some carried standard food packages. Some carried nothing. Their faces were calm, slightly detached. No one looked longer than necessary. Evan stopped at the window of the community center. The glass was clean, but behind it was empty. Once upon a time, things were displayed here. Books, household items, sometimes old photographs of the city. Not for sale, for remembrance. Now, nothing. He saw his reflection in the glass. 34 years old. Neat haircut. Standard colored clothes, no logos or symbols. A man who had nothing to be criticized for. And suddenly he realized that was the problem. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that is soothing, but the kind that forces you to listen to your own thoughts. Evan sat down at the table and looked at the screen. He knew where the personal requests section was. He just never went there. His finger hovered over the touchpad. It's nonsense, he thought. The system would just refuse. But this time, rejection wasn't his main fear. He logged in. The screen darkened, as if it were thinking. Section: Personal needs attention. Unjustified requests may affect your profile. Evan exhaled. I know, he whispered. The input field was empty. White. Too white. Describe your need. He stared at the line and couldn't begin. Not because he didn't know what to write, but because he didn't know what to call it. It wasn't food, not warmth, not light. It was a thing that had no function. Evan remembered seeing an old box in his mother's pantry when he was a child. She never opened it in front of him, but once he peeked inside. There were paper letters inside, yellowed, handwritten. He didn't know what they were at the time, but he remembered the feeling, as if he had touched something alive. He started typing. Request: permission to store a paper object without a utilitarian purpose. He reread it. It sounded cold, untrue. He deleted it. He tried again. Permission for an object that is not used for consumption or production. Deleted. Evan closed his eyes. Book, he said aloud. The word sounded strange, almost forbidden. He typed, request, permission to store the book. The screen froze. Nothing happened for a few seconds. Then a new line appeared. Specify purpose. Evan smiled, for the first time, not ironically. Purpose, he repeated quietly. Are you serious? He wrote, personal. The reply came almost instantly. Need not determined. Function not available. Request has no value. A button appeared below. Close. Evan looked at the word value as if he were seeing it for the first time. Who decided that? He asked the empty room. The screen did not respond. But a second later, a new message appeared. Warning. Activity exceeds standard profile. We recommend returning to balance. Evan leaned back in his chair. So, that was it. The limit. He didn't get the book. He didn't even get a rejection in the usual sense. He was told that his desire did not exist. He suddenly felt something inside him tighten. Not fear, not anger, but a clear, sharp realization. If the system cannot name your desire, it begins to fear you. The screen went dark. Your profile is temporarily restricted. Thank you for your cooperation. The light in the room became a little dimmer, barely noticeable. But Evan noticed. He sat in silence and understood. This was his first step. Not a big one, not heroic, but irreversible. Because now he knew for sure. In a city where nothing is bought, the most dangerous thing is to want what cannot be counted. Chapter 4. People without needs. The restrictions were not felt immediately. The system never acted abruptly. It did not punish. It corrected. A little less light, a slightly longer queue, slightly slower access. Enough to make a person feel uncomfortable, but unable to pinpoint the reason. Evan noticed it in the morning. The water in the tap was colder than usual. Not enough to complain about, just enough to think, I think so. He left the house and saw a message on the screen in the entrance. Your route has been optimized. Thank you for your cooperation. Instead of a direct route to work, his route now ran through the southern sector. It was quieter there. Fewer people. Fewer screens. Evan walked slowly, looking at faces. That's when he first noticed them. They didn't look any different. They weren't dirty or sick. They weren't hiding. But something about them didn't fit. They moved without haste, as if they weren't afraid of being late. And they weren't looking at their screens. One man sat on a bench and looked at the sky. He just looked. He wasn't waiting for a message. He wasn't checking his status. He wasn't counting the time. Evan slowed his pace. People without needs, he thought. And he was surprised by this thought, because such a term did not exist. But it fit perfectly. They weren't talked about in the department. They were in the statistics, but blurred. Minimal consumption, minimal activity, minimal demands. Ideal citizens. But now, seeing them in person, Evan suddenly realized they weren't perfect. They were out of the game. At work, his desk had been moved. Not officially. Just one day, when he arrived, he saw his name on another desk, closer to the wall. Less light. Less movement. Temporarily, Nora said, without looking at him. Optimization. I see, he replied. The first profile that day was strange. Name. Absent. Status. Active. Request. Consumption. Minimal. Recommendation. Do not intervene. Evan turned the page. The second one was the same. The third. Who is it? He asked quietly. Nora shrugged. Those who have learned not to ask. But everyone has needs. She paused for a moment. You're acting strange today. I'm serious. The system thinks otherwise. That sentence sounded like a full stop. After work, Evan went to the southern sector again. Not because his route led there, but because he wanted to check if they were still there. They were. A woman in her 30s stood near an old wall covered with cracks. Such walls were not repaired. They did not affect functionality. She touched the surface with her fingers, as if reading text. It's warm, she said without turning around. Evan stopped. Excuse me? She turned around. Her face was calm. Not empty, just calm. The wall. It stores heat during the day. He hesitated. Do you live here? Sometimes, she replied. And you? He wanted to say work, but the words stuck in his throat. I ended up here by accident. She smiled. There are fewer accidents in this city than it seems. He noticed that she wasn't wearing an identification bracelet on her wrist. That was impossible, and yet it was obvious. What's your name? He asked. Leah. Just Leah? Why do you need more? They were silent for a few seconds. The silence wasn't tense. It was real. You're from the department, she said suddenly. Evan tensed. Why do you think that? You look at people as if they were data, she replied calmly. But today you look at them differently. He wanted to argue, but he didn't. Why don't you submit requests? He asked. Leah tilted her head. Because when you don't ask, they can't take anything away from you. Those words hit him harder than he expected. But the system works with what you give it, she interrupted. And I give silence. Evan looked at her and felt a strange sense of relief. It was as if someone had put into words what he himself had been unable to articulate. Do you know what happens to people like you? He asked. Yes, Leah nodded. They call us stable. They don't touch us. We're convenient. That's dangerous. It's more dangerous to be noticed for wanting something. He remembered the system's message. Restrictions. Dim light. I've already been noticed, he said. Leah looked at him intently. Then you'll have to decide, she said quietly. Do you want to return to balance, or leave it behind? What if I step out? She touched the wall again. Then you'll have to live without permission. Evan left when it started to get dark. His route had changed again, but he wasn't looking at the screen anymore. That evening, he realized there was a group of people in the city whom the system could not count, because they had learned to live with less than they were allowed. And for the first time, he thought, perhaps true freedom begins not with getting more, but with ceasing to ask. Chapter 5. The Woman Who Doesn't Ask. Evan had no plans to go back to the South Sector. In general, few people in the city made plans. The system made the plans, and people carried them out. But the next evening, he caught himself turning his feet in a familiar direction, as if his body remembered something faster than his mind. The light here was different. Not weaker, uneven. The streetlights worked intermittently, screens were less common, and some buildings seemed older than the system itself. It was an area that had not been renovated because it did not disturb the balance. Leah was sitting in the same place as yesterday. On a concrete curb, her legs tucked under her. In front of her lay a piece of chalk. Real, not synthetic. She was drawing something on the asphalt. Evan stopped a few steps away. He didn't want to disturb the moment. Lines appeared on the ground. Not a diagram, not a sign, just lines that crossed and diverged, as if someone were drawing a path they would never take. "You came," she said without looking up. "Were you waiting?" "No, I don't wait. I notice." He moved closer. "Is this allowed?" He nodded at the drawing. Leah smiled. "No." "Then why doesn't the system react?" "Because it doesn't know what to do with it," she replied. "It's not consumption or production. It doesn't cause harm. It doesn't bring benefit. To it, it's noise." Evan watched the chalk leave a mark. Marks weren't welcome here. They were erased. "Have you been here long?" he asked. "In the city? All my life." "In the southern sector?" "Since it stopped being convenient." She finally looked up. "You're from the department," she said. "You should know how it works." "In theory," Evan replied, "but you're not in my records." "Because I made a mistake once," Leah said calmly. "The same mistake you made." He tensed. "I submitted a request," she continued, "a long time ago, before I understood the rules." "For what?" She erased part of the drawing with her palm. "For a person." Evan was silent. "I wanted to live with someone," Leah said. "Not for efficiency, not to optimize space, just with someone." "And what did the system say?" "It said that living together is only possible if there is mutual need, confirmed by indicators," Leah said evenly, as if quoting instructions. "And love is not an indicator." The word sounded strange again. Love. Like book. Like something from the past. "I submitted the request again," she continued. "And again. I tried to explain, to prove, to find words she would understand." "And what happened?" "They started editing my profile," Leah said. "At first, it was subtle. Then it became obvious. Less light, less space, less access. They explained to me that excessive emotional requests upset the balance." "And you stopped?" "No," she shook her head. "I understood." "What exactly?" "That the system isn't against people. It's against uncertainty. And I was uncertain." Evan sat down next to her. The asphalt was cold. "Aren't you afraid?" he asked. "I am," Leah replied honestly, "but not like I used to be." "How were you before?" "Before, I was afraid of losing access. Now, I'm only afraid of myself." They were silent. A drone flew overhead, slowly, silently. It didn't stop. It didn't react. "Do you know what the system is doing to you now?" she asked. "It's restricting my profile." "It's checking," Leah clarified, "whether you'll come back." "Where?" "To convenience." Evan looked at his hands. He suddenly realized that he had never looked at them like that before, not as a tool. "What if I don't?" he asked. Leah stood up. "Then you'll become like us." "Invisible?" "Freer than you think." She handed him the chalk. "Draw something." "I don't know how." "It doesn't matter here." Evan took the chalk. It was rough and brittle. Real. He drew a line, a curve, imperfect. And nothing happened. No message, no signal, no correction. He felt something shift in his chest. "See?" said Leah. "Not everything that's forbidden is punished. Some things are just ignored." "For now," he replied, "until you become a threat." The word hung between them. "And what does the system consider a threat?" Evan asked. Leah looked at his drawing. "Someone who stops asking for permission," she said, "and starts showing others that it's possible." Evan slowly stood up. He knew that this conversation had already changed his profile more than any request could have. Because now he had no desire. Not protest. A choice.